Welcome to the Grid Podcast, Episode 8. Our goal is to educate and to bring hard-hitting truths about America's critical infrastructure. I'm your host, Maria Sumnicht. Political opinions expressed in the podcast by participants are their own opinion and not necessarily that of the Grid Podcast. Please hit the subscribe and notification bell so you can be notified when we go live. Like the video as it helps promote it on YouTube. Our topic today, municipal critical infrastructure emergency planning and the importance of municipalities and counties to plan and prepare if a black sky event were to happen. Municipal readiness and resilience needs to be a national priority, no matter the size of the municipality and county. However, elected officials and municipalities have been reluctant to plan and fund for an extended grid down event. Today, the Grid Podcast is honored to welcome Mike Sutherland, an authority and advisor on municipal county critical infrastructure resilience and preparedness. Mike Sutherland has served as an executive and a director in both public and private organizations, most recently having served as Director of Public Works and at the Emergency Operations Center for 12 years and then Municipal Services Manager for a private consulting firm. This is just a small slice of Mike's accomplishments. Mike, why don't you tell us a bit more about your education, background, and how you got involved with the EMP Task Force, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Maria. It's great to join you today. Previously, I've served as a city council member, a commissioner on a public airport authority board, city planner, operations manager, director of operations and planning, interim planning director, acting airport manager, and have twice served as a president or CEO of private corporations. And I was very fortunate to join the Colorado EMP Task Force early in its inception after helping to develop one of the earliest grid down exercises, which was named Operation Lights Out for Douglas County, Colorado, a county just south of the Denver area. I've served on the Douglas County Incident Management Team in the positions of Incident Commander as well as Plan Section Chief. I served as a Terrorism Liaison Officer for the state of Colorado, Colorado Information Analysis Center, or CIAC, which is the state's fusion center. I also taught for the CELL, C-E-L-L, Counterterrorism Education Learning Lab in Denver, and taught the Community Awareness Program on recognizing the 8 signs of terrorism. Those experiences led to my being invited to a year-long executive leaders program of the Center for Homeland Defense and Security at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And probably one of the biggest career elements that really has helped me was working as airport operations manager at a commercial services airport, where I also served as security coordinator and did a lot of the planning for our disaster emergency planning. Obviously, all airports have to do that. And a lot of the security aspects of that is what got me so interested and involved in counterterrorism, as well as general homeland security. And that was a good introduction to that. Worked with Secret Service. We had a lot of visits from presidents, vice presidents. Saudi ambassador flew in and out of that airport often because he had a home in Aspen. And so that was really where my background began.
That's wonderful. It sounds like you have years of experience, and I know there's a lot of interesting things happening right now. So let's dive in, and could you share with our audience the state of our municipal and county emergency management, resilience, and the ability for local governments to survive and mobilize if there were a black sky event, especially with what's going on now with these solar storms.
Right. Well, this is such a timely and interesting topic for today in light of the outstanding aurora borealis, also known as northern lights. The great show we had across much of Colorado last night may have again tonight. And
Mhm.
for those who are maybe unfamiliar with the cause and also the awesome beauty of it, coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, are unfathomable blasts of energy from the sun. And these blasts, when directed towards the Earth, which is roughly 93 million miles away from the sun, impact our planet's magnetosphere. And for those of us who are old enough to have that kind of a science being taught in schools,
Mhm.
we have the round Earth. And from the North Pole to the South Pole, we have magnetic fields that surround the Earth and to some extent protect the Earth from these solar blasts. And when the massive bursts of energy hit our magnetosphere, generally near the poles, north and south, aurora borealis in the north and aurora australis in the south, it lights up the sky as these energy particles are blasting our magnetosphere. So in essence, we have that colorful glow that can be occasionally seen, normally in the higher latitudes in the north and the south, and that's really the cool part. And I'm as excited as most people who across the United States last night got to see the beautiful skies. But also, and let me assure you, I'm not very good at sugarcoating things. So what I'm going to say, I'll be discussing some of the sordid and often frightening parts of this discussion. These geomagnetic disturbances, or GMDs, we often refer to as, uh, could spell the end of modern existence for a large population of the Earth. In other words, a truly existential threat. And I was trying to think of a good comparison, and what struck me was if you close your eyes and you imagine it's July 3rd, and you're outside, someone shoots off one bottle rocket, and that bottle rocket explodes. You know, a little bang, a little bit of light, and then imagine what the 4th of July evening looks like, and these giant fireworks celebrations go off. Well, in comparison, last night's northern lights that we saw was that bottle rocket going off. What could happen is the July 4th extravaganza. In other words, a blast so powerful that could destroy much of our grid, and in doing so, could really destroy our way of life in northern hemisphere primarily, but also could happen near the southern poles. And I will say that though modern science has helped in predicting and mitigating a lot of this threat, the utility companies that provide our precious household and community electricity have done very little to protect our fragile and vulnerable national grid. And there are, unfortunately, other threats to our power grid that are even more disturbing, and I may touch on those a little bit further on. Um,
Now, has there been an event like this, either in our modern day age or even maybe let's say in the last 120 years?
well, the biggest event in modern history occurred in 1989 and is known, 1859. I'm getting ahead of myself. 1859, and it was known as the Carrington event. And Mr. Carrington was an amateur astronomer who lived outside of London, and he was watching solar activity and spotted these massive blasts of energy that left the sun. And back then, there wasn't much knowledge about it, but he observed that, took notes, drew diagrams of it, and less than a day later, that energy blast hit Earth And fortunately, at the time, there wasn't much in the way of electronics. The vast majority of the electronics on the planet was the telegraph system.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read that just about that time, they had laid the first transatlantic cable connecting Europe to North America. And what happened when that energy blast hit the Earth was it fried much of that system. The little outposts across the country and across parts of Europe that had the little tap, tap, tap telegraph
Mm-hmm.
systems where they would tap out Morse code, there was such a blast of power that even after they disconnected their then crude batteries, there was enough power in the system that they were still able to tap out some communications. Ultimately, though, the energy blast started fires on their desks, papers caught fire, and in some cases, the entire telegraph office burned to the ground.
Wow.
Well, jump ahead, 1921, there was an event, I think they called it the railroad event, which was pretty massive by most standards and caused a lot of damage. Then, closer to our day and time, 1989, there was a fairly large impact to the earth. It affected mostly the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada, and mostly the Quebec area, and I think it was known as the Quebec blackout. And I believe 9 states were without power for up to 8 days.
Wow.
Then again, the closest call we've had was in 2012 when a massive blast left the sun. And if the Earth had been approximately 2 weeks farther along on its path around the Earth, annual path, we would have been hit with something that was more massive than the Carrington event and likely would have fried the entire grid and changed life as we know it. So we've been pretty darn lucky.
Mm-hmm.
The event yesterday was considered a high G4, or on the KP graphic scale, about an 8.9. So not quite the highest. G5 is considered the highest, but each of those G levels uh, is exponential. So the difference between a G4 and a G5 is pretty massive. And unfortunately, a low G5, which is what we had, I believe, in April or May of 2024,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even compare to what would also be classified as a G5, such as the Carrington event. So we're under a bit of a threat right now for potentially a G5, because a couple of blasts that came off of the sun yesterday, the first couple, I believe, were fairly slow moving, and then a pretty massive one that was faster moving caught up to those. And that's what worried scientists and folks at the Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado. And so they've been giving us warnings. The utilities are under various warnings. And so there we are today. It's exciting, it's beautiful, but it also is something that we need to be a little bit nervous about.
Yeah, I agree. I actually was at NOAA in 2024 on the day that massive solar flare hit. We were actually in the control room, and
Mm,
I was actually looking at the monitors and was the first one to notice that that doesn't look right. And then this big thing shot out of the side of the sun, and everyone's eyes got really big. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, uh,
Well, that's
we
a lot
dodged
of
a bullet that
watching this probably know a little bit about Space Weather Prediction Center, but
day.
it is an amazing place to visit and get a tour of, and to see their massive collection of screens on the wall in a
Mhm.
rather dark room, and see the technology that is monitoring our sun is just phenomenal. And it's also a little bit comforting to know that these folks are watching out for us. And I should mention the Air Force has a similar system and monitoring program, and the two entities really stay well connected, communicate well, and both of those entities will send out notifications to the utility companies. And one thing to note, we do have a couple of satellites positioned out there in space about 1 million miles away from Earth that give us a little bit more of a heads up warning besides just
Hmm.
the cameras in the observatories that are watching the sun. And I used to wonder, well, why only 1 million miles out there when there's 92 more million miles? And then some of the kind folks at Space Weather explained to me something I should have figured out. And that was that, well, if you get beyond 1 million miles, the gravitational pull of the sun would draw those satellites all the way into the sun and burn them up. And so the balancing point is only about 1 million miles away from Earth. So that was something I learned from those brilliant folks that are watching out for us.
Yeah. And most municipalities, would you say, based on your experience and your service in municipal government and infrastructure, are they ready for anything like this happening? Can you talk to that as far as plans go? Um, you know, I'm lucky because you were actually, I live in the city that you were actually stood up this emergency. So I know we're okay.
Well, I
What
will
about
say that
others?
Douglas County and the town of Parker, we did a lot of planning. And if I can back up just slightly, the
Hmm.
national, state, and local governments really are only minimally prepared to deal with the specter of not having electrical power for an extended period of time. And uh, to talk about this, need to really talk about critical infrastructure elements. And there are 16 infrastructure categories that are primarily what our national, state, and local governments look at. And a few examples are water and sanitation, healthcare facilities, communications, food production and distribution, petroleum extraction and refining, traffic and transportation. These are just a few of those 16. And beyond these, we need resources for our fire departments, for our law enforcement, emergency medical responders, and public works agencies, many of which are provided by special districts, municipalities, and the counties we live in.
Hmm.
Some of that also by the state, but when it comes to those infrastructure pieces, that's what we really plan for. And if I can, I'll show a picture. I'll put it in front of the camera.
Yeah, perfect.
Hard to see, but this is an outdated emergency operations plan that this was my markup copy when we updated it, I think in 2013. Also worked on the Douglas County update of its emergency operations plan. And there are many pieces of the plan that apply. Very little actually applies to electrical grid down. Very few references, and I push very hard to get those. I'll also show something, hopefully this can be seen. This is something Douglas County put together, and it's a little flip chart kind of a booklet that was available to all of the systems, and all of the citizens. And I'll just read off some of the categories: family disaster plan, stockpile checklist, shelter recovery, plans for needy, meaning handicapped,
Hmm.
disabled, which often get neglected when we're talking
Right.
about the needy people, shelter in place advice, stay or go, pet owners, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, pet supply kit, pet evacuations, thunderstorms, lightning, winter storms, extreme cold, flood, tornado, wildfires, terrorism, active shooter, public health emergency, pandemic flu, which we all learned a lot more about in 2020,
Yeah.
hazmat, and then the resources that go with it. So little documents like this are very valuable, and some communities have them. Many don't go to that extent. You asked about municipalities. Sadly, a lot of them count on the counties being our resource that's going to protect us. In Parker, I was fortunate enough to have, when I first went to work there, I was hired to reorganize a rapidly growing public works department, as well as to really develop an emergency operations center and program. And I'll mention a book that was written in part by Aidan Hogan and John DeBoer. And this is it. I don't know if it's still available. Security Planning in an Unstable World, a public official's guide. And Aidan Hogan was a critical staff member in Oklahoma City when the terrorists blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And so he had really intensive experience with that. And he wrote this book primarily for municipalities and local governments back in 2005. And since then, more and more has been done and studied, and more preparations have occurred. Now, the planning for a dark sky event, or grid down as it's often referred, falls into the must consider category, I believe. But it's amazing how few, as I mentioned earlier, of the plans and EOPs, emergency operation plans, really talk about power loss, and certainly don't talk about the long-term effects.
Yeah.
Most all communities, both local and county, at this point, all do regional hazard and risk assessments, sometimes called FIRA, threat, hazard, incident, risk assessments, and then submit those to the state, and the state compiles them, and they all go into a document. But most of that exercise that you go through to create those documents is what's most likely to happen in our community. So in the Front Range of Colorado, floods, tornadoes, wildfires are big across the whole western United States, as are floods and heavy rain situations. Very little is discussed ever about the electrical grid. Now, if you look at the advice given by the federal government through FEMA and other organizations, primarily FEMA, and they do a great job. There's a lot of education available through FEMA, but the general instructions given are for families to prepare for 3 days of a disaster. Well, if a grid goes down,
Yeah,
you better count on 6 months.
at least.
In situations such as wildfires, tornadoes, if it's localized, meaning maybe one town in Kansas has been devastated by it, there will be utility crews which do a fantastic job. I pick on utility companies a lot, but their crews do a fabulous job, and they respond from state to state to help out with the restoration of the grid in those areas that are affected. In 2012, we did one of the first grid down or black sky exercises, considered a functional exercise, Operation Lights Out. And the purpose of it really was to test the capabilities of the policy group and the Douglas County Emergency Operations Center. And it was an exercise put together by the partnership of Douglas County governments, which really was all of the municipalities in the area, special districts, utility companies, healthcare facilities, and we got together. And it was an exercise primarily for the policy group folks. So in our case, that was elected officials and the senior appointed officials, directors in most cases, got together. And I'll read off a little bit so that I don't misstate some of this. The general exercise scenario of Operation Lights Out is that Douglas County is entering the second day of a statewide electrical service outage. In reality, we were looking at it as about an 8-state region looking largely at the Western grid. And I should mention, for those who may not know, there are three grids in the U.S., all interconnected: Western, Eastern, and the Texas grid. And they all connect up in a secret location in the Rocky Mountain area. And when one goes down, the others could. So back when Texas went through their situation, I believe that was 2022, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
or
Yep.
21. My memory escapes me on that, but there was concerns that if their grid went down, it could affect the others. So needless to say, when we planned our exercise, we were looking at an 8 state. And the reason for that largely was because we wanted the scenario to be, we're not going to get much help from the states surrounding us. So what are we going to do? And so the scenario was, we wake up on a Tuesday morning, coffee maker doesn't work, TV doesn't come on, get in our cars to drive to work, and the radios work in our cars. And we're being told that it's a widespread power outage, but the utilities expect it to come back around noon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we try to drive into the city, and there are traffic jams. And this would be a good time to talk about traffic signals, because
Yes.
most traffic signals do not have a backup battery system.
No, they
In
don't.
part, when I left, we had 89 traffic signals. Every one of them had a battery backup. Well, that's all great and wonderful for about 3 or 4 hours, and then that battery
Mm-hmm.
stopped. So, what are fire departments? What are police officers, law enforcement doing? They are responding to accidents, traffic jams, and incidents of mad people. Well, you try to drive into the city, go to your office, you realize that's impossible. You somehow make a U turn, realize you need to get some gas in your car. So you pull
Yep.
into a gas station, and there's a line of 100 cars in front of you. Everybody honking, everyone mad. Nobody can buy gas because guess what?
The
As
pump's
we
full.
learned when we did our research for Douglas
Yep.
County's exercise, we found that not a single public gas station in all of Douglas County had a backup generator to operate their pumps.
Yep.
Well, that was disappointing, but we also realized all of those transactions, when you stick your credit card in the machine, in the gas
Mm-hmm.
pump, that is being transacted via a signal going up to a satellite, then back down to a banking establishment, and then back up and back to your credit card. And then you pull your card out and you can get gas. Well, no transactions are going to happen. So we quickly learned that a couple of things might happen. It's going to be difficult to get fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And then communities, and we realized that communications was something we wondered about locally. And our assumption in the beginning when we started this research was that we'd probably have landlines for the longest period of time. But once we first met with our planning teams, and CenturyLink at that time, the primary landline provider, said, no, actually, your cellular will probably last longer. Excuse me, well, jump ahead 13 years, and very few people I know even have landlines
Yep.
anymore. So we rely on cellular. Well, those cellular towers, most of them do have battery backup and or generators. Well, those generators will keep it operating as long as they have fuel. Jump back now to what I said about where do they get their fuel?
Right.
Unless they have very large fuel tanks, those towers are only going to operate for 24 to 36 hours. So,
Correct.
what do the municipalities and counties face when it comes to communications? Well, how do we even talk to our police department? Well, the first thing we look for are ham radio providers.
Mm.
And in our incident management team and our EOC, Emergency Operations Center for the county, we had ham operators who were part of the team. And so when we began our exercise, we also started with ham operators in the close by, not both in the EOC and near where the policy group was meeting. My job in that exercise was to be a facilitator, moderator. I had the authority to say timeout
Hmm.
if the group of mostly politicians got too far off base and redirect them. First thing they panicked over was, oh, communications. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I called a timeout and said, well, we have ham operators. Oh, great. Well, so how many people have ham radios? Well, not that many,
I
but
do.
government.
Yeah.
Excellent. Nowadays, you can buy very small
Yeah.
handheld radios that have ham capabilities. I
Hmm.
should mention, if you don't have a ham radio license, operator's license, you can monitor ham,
Yep.
but you cannot broadcast on it. Well, if the grid goes down, I don't think the FCC is going to come after any of us if we have to communicate that way.
Right.
But there are other aspects besides the ham radio frequencies where we can all communicate. So that was one of the big issues. Then the question began, okay, or the injects. I should mention an inject is something you throw in when you're having a tabletop exercise or a full scale exercise that can muddy the waters, throw you off balance, or really confuse the situation and complicate it. One of those injects was, okay, we're starting to have a little bit of rioting going on. People are breaking into Sam's Clubs, Costco's, Walmart's, and stripping the shelves because they can't buy
They can't
anything
buy
because they
anything.
can't
Yep.
operate. Everything's computerized.
Yep.
And so, what will our law enforcement officers be doing? Well, the policy group quickly realized they would be overwhelmed. And so one of the county commissioners who was acting as the chairperson of this policy group suggested, well, what if we contact all of the people in the county that have concealed carry permits and we deputize them to help out?
That's true.
And not a bad idea. I will give her credit for that. But I had to call time out and say, how are you planning to contact those people?
Mm.
We're nearing the end of the time that we have cellular service by the time this exercise was underway. And they mulled that around. Well, let's see, we can call a few of them. We'll send out our officers to go door to door because obviously the counties have the records for the concealed carry permit. I said, those officers may be a little bit overwhelmed doing other things. So, what's your backup plan for that? And there really wasn't a backup plan for that. So, I guess our lesson was that you can't really count on law enforcement to go out and run those kinds of errands for you. It's going to get real messy real fast. Another aspect of what local governments, municipalities need to worry about is hospitals, healthcare, and
Mm.
emergency medical response. One of our early assumptions was that, well, it'd probably be 2 or 3 days before most of the folks who are on in home oxygen systems before they run out. Well, once we pulled the healthcare hospital people into our group, they said, no, that's likely to happen within the first 3 to 6 hours. So your fire and EMS people are going to be overwhelmed rapidly with calls for assistance and help. In addition to that, folks are going to swarm towards hospitals. And so there's going to need to be law enforcement, perhaps fire, EMS people setting up response tents and services right there. So let's jump back to your initial question, and that is, what are municipalities going to be doing? What do they need to be doing? Water and sanitation is one of the biggest issues
It
we
is.
will face in a grid down situation. As most people probably realize, the water comes through the pipes, comes to our sinks, our faucets, our showers, our commodes. And what they may not realize is all of those are pumped using electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And many water and wastewater facilities have some backup generation, or they might have some solar generation to assist. But in reality, that's not going to last very long.
No, not at all.
So, one of the many recommendations, and the first thing we as citizens and local government officials need to talk about, is reserving, preserving, and limiting your water use.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that's advised is plug your bathtub as best you can and fill it up while you still have some water running. Don't forget that you have water in the tanks of your toilets. That is clean water,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's in the tank. And anything you can to store water. So, lesson number one, we all need to have a significant amount of water stored. And so, if I think the advisement is that for each person in a household, there should be 1 gallon of water per day,
Okay.
bare minimum.
Right.
Well, let's say you have a family of four, that's 4 gallons per day. And let's say this thing goes on for 3 months, 90 days. 3 times 9, 27, 270 gallons of water we would need. And truthfully, the municipalities or the special districts that provide water and sewer are not going to be able to provide that for very long. So, lesson number one for all of us is store all the water you can.
Yep.
And also have water filtration systems. Now,
Mm-hmm.
anybody who does much background or backpacking, excuse me, or camping should probably have some water filtration systems. My advice, and those of people who know a whole lot more than me, say each person in your family should have one of those. Each person in the family should have a go kit, and there's different descriptions of what a go kit is. I named mine and did a lot of presentations on exit fast packs. Small backpack that has a supply of the most important things you need if you had to grab it on your way out the door, or that you keep in your vehicle at all times. So my daughter, my wife, and I sat down, made a list of what we wanted. Walmart was a great supply source for inexpensive pieces of the things, and I can describe some of the things that go into those kits, but the things you would want to grab on your way out the door. Then beyond that, you have larger go kits. For a lot of people who do backpacking or camping, you probably have tubs with your backpack, your sleeping bags, your tents, other water filtration supplies, and first and foremost in all of these kits, first aid supplies and
Yep.
medicines. So a lot of us have medicines we need to have every day, or at least on hand for the emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it all begins. And our municipalities and our counties and special districts are not going to provide those for us.
Nope.
As I mentioned earlier, it's often suggested to have 3 days worth of supplies. Well, yes, 3 days and what you're going to grab quickly if you have to leave. Let's talk a little bit about shelter in place. And what that means is okay, you stay in your home for as long as you can. Talked about water and sanitation. Well, you need to do what you can to supply water, but something that should concern all of us is what happens to your sewer system.
Exactly. People don't think about that.
Yes, and uh, I'll let you mention what you've done for your home because I think that's a very good idea.
Well, I went around to all the drains in the home, including in the basement, um, your toilet. inside, not the tank, but the toilet itself. I measured everything, and then I went on everybody's favorite platform, Amazon, and I bought plugs for everything. So as soon as the water goes out, that's the first thing you need to go do is plug up every drain, including the one from your hot water heater. Right? There's always a drain next to your hot water heater that drains out and joins the rest of your septic system out of your house. And people don't think about that, but what happens is people will keep flushing the toilet without any power. There is no pumping of this of sewage back into the system. So it will eventually back up. And if you don't plug your home right away, over probably within a couple weeks, you won't be able to live in your home because of the toxic fumes.
Exactly. And so shelter in place is a great idea to a certain extent.
Percent.
And I'll bring up backflow preventers. These are
Yeah,
devices that are easiest to put in when a new home is being constructed. And I haven't looked at the pricing on that. If it's added when you're building your system, it could be $1,000 to $2,000. If you retrofit and dig up your front yard to put one in
yeah,
between your house and the public sanitation system, it can get fairly expensive, $5,000 to $15,000, depending on how much landscaping or concrete that has to be torn up. Let's talk about the sanitation system for a minute.
mhm,
Uh, as most of us are aware, when we flush the toilets or pour water down the drain, it goes through a series of pipes out of our house and then into the underground sanitary system. Those pipes typically run downhill to as far as they can go to a spot that then needs what's known as a lift station. Lift stations often will be at low areas in the system, and then it has to get pumped up higher so it can again flow downhill until eventually it reaches the sanitary treatment
mhm.
facility. Most communities have plants around them that take care of that job. Well, there could be a half a dozen or more lift stations on that line, and those lift stations are operated by, guess what, electricity.
Mhm.
And back when I did research, I found no lift stations that had battery backups. And I suspect that even if they've been added since my time, they probably will only last about as long as the battery backups for traffic signal systems. And so it isn't going to last very long. So, as you mentioned, eventually it will back up. And if you happen to be the lowest house in your neighborhood, yours is the first system that's going to back all the way up. And if you don't have a backflow prevention device, then you're going to have to get out of that house. Which leads to, okay, what do you do if you have to abandon the shelter in place idea? And that is typically those who have camping gear will go to the nearest river or pond or lake or stream and camp out. So, over a short period of time, there are going to be dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people heading to that source of water, and they're going to try to ride it out for as long as they can there. Well, we all know that people are a little lazy, and when you have to do your morning business, how far are you willing to walk to go do that? Well,
Right.
within a very short time, we're going to have a sanitation disaster in all of those encampments. And what will kill the largest number of our population, more than likely, in a black sky event is typhoid, diphtheria, and cholera.
Colorado. Yep.
And that will be spread in these areas where there are sanitation issues. And so that is a very big concern that we have. In the doom and gloom side of my story, I have to mention that most of the people who are experts in grid down situations have predicted that as much as 90% of the US population is likely to die in the first year without electricity. And most of those folks will probably die because of those three: typhoid, diphtheria, and, and cholera
Yeah.
that will hit us all. And so
Yeah.
while municipalities, local governments do what they can, special districts, a lot of sanitation and water provided by special districts, as we know, and they're considered part of local government and very important part. So there's very little they can do for us if we don't have electricity. And so when we start talking about what our local governments, our cities, our counties, even the state can do for us, we plan, we prepare, we do exercises,
Mm.
but most of the things we can respond to require a lot of communication: radios, telephones, cell phone, television, public broadcast systems. So, one of the first and most important pieces of advice given to all of us as citizens is buy a weather radio, battery powered, and have it safely tucked away along with battery powered and the wind up type of
Frank. Yep.
flashlights that we can get. So, because batteries aren't going to last that long, if we're smart, we stock up on batteries until we have no more cabinet or drawer space for those. But you still need the crank type. And there will be no more frightening point in all this than when we can no longer communicate with our loved ones, with our local government officials, the fire department we want to call, the police department we want to call. And so that's a beginning point there.
Yeah.
Something I want to mention, and this goes back largely to my time in airport and aviation management and security. If you think about it, at any given time over the United States, I've heard estimates of 1,000 commercial airliners in the sky at one time, as many as 23,000 aircraft total over the US. Let's assume it's somewhere in the middle of all that. Well, those airplanes nowadays rely on GPS, global positioning systems, that rely on satellites. I believe there are 30 of them surrounding the globe now, probably more. And there are some smaller systems with satellites out there. Well, if we have a geomagnetic disturbance, such as we had last night, there are alerts that go out to our satellite operators and to the people, the astronauts who are sitting on the International Space Station and the Chinese space station that they have now,
Mm-hmm.
which I understand is having some problems currently. But what happens when they're blasted with the energy that comes from a CME on our sun? They're either going to be taken out. There is a huge risk to the astronauts that are out there, although they have taken measures in the past couple of decades to protect them better. But those satellites are likely to get fried in place. So
Exactly.
GPS is going to go down. A lot of pilots learn to fly using dead reckoning, meaning you use the old fashioned compass. You look out the windscreen and out the side window, see where you are. You still have a few paper maps, or maybe you have maps on your computer that
Yeah.
possibly survived that, and you can find an airport to land at, or a highway, or something like that. Well, just imagine the number of those that don't. And I hate to even suggest it, but there are probably thousands of aircraft that are going to go down in the first few hours. If only a fraction of those start wildland fires, particularly forested areas of the United States are going to suffer from a secondary disaster. And we all have seen what happens very rapidly when there are wildfires raging around us. And there won't be communications to send out wildland fire teams or local fire departments. There'll be very little contact. And let me say, after a day or two of a black sky event, police, men and women, firefighters, public works people, prison guards are going to come to the realization that this isn't going to work. I need to get home and protect my family.
Right.
And so, without being too doom and gloom, I am going to mention this. Prisons and jails are mostly locked up because of electronic locks. Now, what happens when the grid goes down? Many of those will stay locked.
Yep.
A few years ago, I was told that most of the outer perimeter locks are still manual, and so the prisoners would still be contained. However, if most morally sound individuals who happen to be prison guards want to do it on their way out, when they decide they're heading home, they may open those gates and run like crazy and head home. We all know that there are gangs within the prisons who are well organized outside those prisons, foreign gangs that have been infiltrated our country and our communities. And I was told at one point that motorcycle gangs are very well organized,
Mm-hmm.
and many of those are former military folks. So I won't say they're bad or that they're good, but they're going to be looking out for their own. And so that's another secondary threat or disaster we can have when this happens. Won't go too much into terrorists, but a lot of our threats come from terrorists.
Yep.
The biggest threats to our grid are kinetic. So, as has been demonstrated with the Metcalf substation outside of San Jose, California, there was a well organized group of, we'll call them a cell of 5 or 6 people, who showed up one night and shot the snot out of transformers and the facilities from outside the fence. They also got into a manhole and severed the cables, and one of them happened to go to the 911 center. And this was a test of how resilient the grid might be if one substation was taken down. They
And
intentionally left a lot of evidence on the ground.
right.
Amazingly, none of the shell casings had fingerprints on them. So these folks were a well trained group. And in fact, I think it was Homeland Security sent a team of Navy SEAL instructors to go evaluate that, and they determined that it was a well oiled group of individuals who did that. A
There
year
was.
later,
There
yeah.
was. I lived in the hills of San
I,
Jose, and my
oh, okay.
neighborhood was affected. So
Yes,
we
yes,
actually did lose power
yeah.
for about a week. But because I survived the 1989 earthquake
Oh, okay. Yeah.
in the San Francisco Bay Area, we had learned our lesson to have water and things. That was an eye opener for me and my family was the 1989 earthquake. And you mentioned something, and I just had a revelation um, with between these corona mass injections or and earthquakes,
Mhm.
because typically there's a lot of seismic activity during and after. And that 1989 event you spoke of, well, what happened in 1989 in October 17th? The Loma Prieta earthquake.
Yes, indeed.
So,
And we often hear a lot about how the fault, the San Andreas Fault that runs through a good part of California, is one of the high risk areas.
yep.
In fact, it's probably more high risk in the coastal areas of Oregon and Washington because the fault is out in the ocean.
Yep.
And as we've heard and we witnessed in Fukushima, Japan, when that earthquake of a large scale goes off, it creates tsunamis.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the coastal area of Oregon and Washington is more susceptible than even California is. Another earthquake zone is the area along the Mississippi
Yep.
River. And it is one that some experts, seismic experts, are even more concerned about. And there's evidence that the Mississippi River has changed directions and locations numerous times over the Earth's history because of earthquakes. So that certainly is a consideration we have to have. So
Right.
yeah, there are those kinetic attacks that could hit our power grid. There's obviously Mother Nature, such
Mm-hmm.
as earthquakes that could affect it. Mostly those are regional. Uh, the CMEs, coronal mass ejections that can hit Earth like it is doing right now, could do that. Cybersecurity, of which you are one of the top experts in our country, and thank you for serving on the task force on national and homeland security. By the way, you're a terrific asset for all of us on that, and that is considered by many to be our number one threat, particularly from our foreign adversaries.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, basically, without too much trouble, they can attack most of our utilities across the country. And infiltration has been detected in most all SCADA systems. And what SCADA is system control and what's the D part of that?
Yeah.
System
I forgot
control and
yeah.
uh,
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 access and uh,
and
yeah, I
I'm
forget.
drawing a blank there, but SCADA systems
Yeah.
are what control
That's
sanitary sewer systems, water systems, the utility grid, almost anything, transportation, pipelines, all of these things that can be affected relatively easy uh, by ne'er-do-wells in other countries. And we know the four major uh, nation states that want to get us, plus a handful of others who fortunately don't have the technology yet, but are striving every day of every month of every year to get that technology so they can
yeah.
attack us. So that's three of the four biggest threats. The fourth being an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. More typically, we're concerned about high altitude EMP. And the US and the USSR, Soviet Union, discovered in early 1961 and 62, both countries did high altitude testing in places. The US did our testing out over the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
The Soviets did it over Kazakhstan. And what they learned kind of by accident, the US found that, oh gosh, we really destroyed a lot of the communication system in Hawaii, 900 to 1,300 miles away. Uh, one of the reports was that all of the taxi systems on Hawaii lost all of their radio communications. Nothing much was ever said about what the Navy and the other military aspects in the Hawaiian Islands had happened to them, because that was kept rather top secret at the time. But the US and the Soviet Union said, hey, that's a great weapons idea because we can bring another country to its knees simply by setting off nuclear weapons, and we won't kill a bunch of people in the process. I was a little kid, and my dad had served in the military and worked in Army uh, signals corps, and toward the end of his time was in signals intelligence as a technical guy. And I remember him telling me when I was in elementary school, oh, yeah, there's this new weapon that can be used, and a bomb can go off and not kill a single person, but it can knock out a bunch of the systems. And so our enemies will be brought to their knees. Well, I was a little kid, thought, oh, yeah, okay, that's cool. Well, now it's safe to say that every country that has nuclear weapons as their first strike plan of attack includes a high altitude electromagnetic pulse attack. And that will take out our grid. It will corrode and destroy underground pipelines. It will, if it's an EMP, there are three sources of energy: E1, E2, and E3. I won't get into that because I'm not a very good scientist to describe that. But the coronal mass ejections have two of those three energy sources that could take out our grid, corrode pipelines. Those energy blasts travel across long lines, so anything above ground. They also, those energy blasts will pass through earth, soil, rock, water, and so can hit pipelines and underground facilities. So uh, EMPs are the thing that scare people in the know the most. And people have asked me, how in the world do you sleep at night knowing about this stuff? Well, think about it in the day. We all work on it. Our task force on national and homeland security, our number one focus is on grid protection. Unfortunately, municipalities and counties do not have very good plans for
No.
what to do. Uh, it's been asked about, what about emergency shelters in communities? Well, for the short run, those will help. Hospital areas will be inundated, as I mentioned earlier, churches, school areas, but there won't be a food supply great enough to last more than a couple of days. Food banks will run out of food in a short time. Food distribution systems will come to a standstill rather rapidly. Local governments now, just about all of them, have continuity of operations plans, also known as COOP plans.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a description of the hierarchy of public officials down through appointed officials and management in local governments, all the way from the president down to the lowest level of federal worker, state governments down to the lowest level of worker, local governments do those same things. There is not enough caches of food, water, and something we need now, particularly if we can't use electric cars or electric devices, we need petroleum based gasoline and diesel powered vehicles to provide distribution and food supply, water supply if the pipelines aren't working.
Yep.
And we will find out very quickly that we don't have enough supplies for people. What our local governments should be doing, and I haven't heard much about it in the approximately 10 years I've been away from local government, a program called CERT that is sponsored by FEMA. And CERT stands for Community Emergency Response Teams.
Mm-hmm.
And there is training available, and we should all, as individuals, organizations, church groups, book clubs, I don't care what group it is, should be contacting local government insisting that they provide CERT training around our communities. Homeowners associations should do that. On our staff, we had a couple of trainers who went through CERT training so they could teach the classes. I was for a while, trained the trainer for the CERT instructors. Uh, I'm sure that training has evolved and become much more valuable and probably more refined than it was when I was involved. But that is what our local government needs to be doing, needs to be insisting upon without frightening everybody with the cold, hard facts. That'll help if there's a wildfire in the area and there has to be evacuations.
Mm,
It teaches people how to help each other. Church
exactly.
groups are known for being able to help groups. Kiwanis clubs, Elks clubs, Rotary clubs, all of these entities should be training in the CERT program because a sad fact of life is that if we have a grid down event, we are not going to be rescued by our county incident management team. Those people will try to get to the emergency operations centers. They'll try to rally the fire departments, the police departments, the public works, the EMS folks, and the mass casualty groups. But that's only going to last for a few days if the grid goes down.
Yep.
Bottom line is all of us as individuals and families and small social groups, neighborhoods need to make plans. And I know it's a huge task, but we need to have 6 months to a year's worth of food and water in our homes. And yes, that can seem daunting if we have a small apartment or a condo where I'm sitting right now. You can only store so much, but it's amazing how much you can stack if you're determined to do that. And
Right.
there are great sources. And I'm going to mention a couple of books. I'm going to hold them up. We talk about resilience a lot, and there's one step past that we really studied this author, and his name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And he wrote a book
Hmm.
titled Anti-Fragile. And he also wrote The Black Swan, which was one of the first black sky type books to be mentioned. And he talks about rather than resilience, which means your ability to bounce back, we need to be talking about becoming anti fragile. In other words, hardening everything in advance, not bouncing back. And I think there are a ton of systems out there that we talk about resilience, but we need to harden. And the grid is certainly one of those. Now, back in, I think it was 2011, a professor at Montreat College in just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, wrote 3 books, the first of which is 1 Second After. And certainly, Bill Fortune doesn't need me selling copies of his book for him. He's done quite well. This is a fictional book, but about 30 pages into it, I realized that it is more of a case study than we would like to believe. His second novel, well, 1 Second After means what begins 1 second after a high altitude electromagnetic pulse takes down our grid. And his novel goes through the hardships that this community goes through. His second book is called 1 Year After, and it's based on what the survivors in this community have gone through and are facing at the 1 year mark. It's a little more like a novel, but his third one, I believe, was called Final Days, if I remember right. I don't have a copy of it handy, and it really is more of a novel, but it's what's going on as this society is trying to get back together. So I have advised everybody I've met and worked with in emergency management and homeland security, read that novel, but don't do it at night. Read it during the day, on the weekends. If you read it at night, you will not sleep well.
Yeah, or don't read it on an airplane like I did.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I
So,
had to stop reading it. I was like, okay.
well, moving beyond that, Ted Koppel, for many of us on this podcast who are watching, will remember Ted Koppel from the original Nightline on ABC. And friends of mine called him Disaster Ted because he and Nightline really came about whenever there were disasters. Well, in 2015, Ted Koppel wrote
Lights out.
Lights Out.
Well,
A cyber attack, a nation unprepared, surviving the aftermath. And it's remarkable. I just read back through some of this in the last few days, and he talks to some of the individuals I've been lucky enough to meet. General Petraeus, who was our CIA director for a while, and others. And he talks about what needs to be done. We'll jump ahead 10 years, and we really have not made that great of headway.
Nope.
And I will mention Dr. Peter Pry, often referred to as Peter Vincent Pry, who passed away a couple of years ago. Brilliant man, worked in national intelligence, was the United States' top authority on Russian nuclear capabilities and Chinese nuclear capabilities. And he really was the foundation and the man who began our efforts for what for us was the Colorado EMP Task Force and what has evolved into the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. Glenn Rhodes, who is our National Executive Director, and I see that Glenn
he's in the chat.
mentioned to us what SCADA was, Supervisory Control and
Data Acquisition. I knew that.
Thank
right?
you, Glenn.
Yeah.
yes, my brain goes blank sometimes.
Yeah, same
here. Glenn has taken over the reins since Peter passed away. We have, in our early days, I was considered one of our terrorism experts and knew a lot. Well, now I'm probably the dumbest person on our whole task force of 80, 90, 100 people. I'm happy to say, but we have some of the most fantastic experts, including yourself, Maria, in our group, and we have been fighting the battle that Peter started for us. Dr. Pry was brilliant. He initially battled in the Washington D.C. area. He was the top staff person in the first Congressional Commission on EMPs and on the second Congressional EMP Commission. And then he started the EMP Task Force, and it became what it is. And after years of frustration for him and many of us, we decided to take the battle to the state level and try to get our states to force the utility operators and companies to harden the grid. And we're still banging our heads against that.
It's an uphill battle. Yeah, it's an uphill battle.
It is. And FERC, federal, here I go again, Federal Electric Resource.
Commission.
I can't remember. It's one of the commissions. They oversee the grid to some extent, and then other national organizations, and we try to work with them. A lot of the time we hear them say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. We've got that under control. We're hardening the grid to X standards. Well, X standards don't get it done and won't in the case of a massive GMD or a high altitude EMP. And we can't get much out of them. And we learned a couple of years ago through research that more than $1.2 billion has been spent by utility companies lobbying politicians, candidates, all the way from U.S. House of Representatives, state legislatures, all the way up through president and vice presidential candidates. And what they're lobbying is, do not force new regulations on us. We don't want to force our utility customers to pay a penny more than they have to. So they're doing very little. And, while I pick on utility companies a lot, as I've said, the folks who work for them work very hard and do a great job. but we need more pressure on Excel Energy,
Mm,
Pacific Gas and Electric,
yeah.
PGE, Duke Energy on the East Coast areas, I think Central East Coast, a very large entity. They're stepping up some. I'll give them some kudos, but since I don't live there, I'm not that familiar with what all they're doing. But we as citizens need to keep pressure on people, unrelenting pressure from local governments all the way to the White House to get more done, to prepare. But we also have to have the willpower. We
Yep.
have to spend the money a little at a time if you have to, but don't wait until tomorrow, the next day, next month. Start this afternoon. Go to the grocery store, buy an extra case of soup.
Yeah.
Then next week, buy an extra case of bottled water. Work from small to large on what we can do. And that, Maria, is about all I can say. It's largely up to us. We get a lot of help from our local governments,
Yep.
state government, and the feds for regional disasters, but something that is an existential threat to all of us, we need to really start working on to protect ourselves. So,
Yeah, uh, and it doesn't have to be one of these events. I'm sure Asheville, North Carolina, never imagined that a hurricane would make it so far inland that the remnants of that storm would completely destroy their infrastructure. So,
oh, exactly.
it can happen anywhere.
Or
Katrina.
Hurricane Sandy,
Yeah,
what it did to New York City.
yeah.
Were you in New York City at the time of
No, I
Sandy?
wasn't in New York City at the
Oh,
time,
okay. Well, I
but
I have
yeah,
friends who worked for FEMA there, and they were put up on a luxury cruise ship because there was no housing for
yeah,
them in
everything
places.
was flooded. You know,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, it was amazing. And who thinks about
yeah,
hurricanes hitting Boston or New York
yeah,
City or
but they
whatever the
do.
case? Yeah, and I find it a bit ironic that Asheville, North Carolina, the backdrop for 1 second after and 1 year after
Mhm.
uh, uh, Bill Fortune's books, uh, it's ironic that
It's in
the
those areas.
Asheville area was so slammed. And I've been back through that area and I've seen some of the devastation. I have close friends and family who live in that area. And it's a wake up call and it's evidence that our national government can only do so much for us, and our
Exactly.
expectations need to be tempered. And FEMA does a lot of good things; they fall short in a lot of ways, but we cannot expect them to come to the aid of the entire United States, nor will our military, until each of our military bases have their own small nuclear reactors, and those reactors and their grid system is protected. They won't be able to do a whole lot to help us. And it's overdue for small nuclear reactors. Heck, of all the disasters, you think of 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, um, Chernobyl, has never been a death caused by the event itself. Chernobyl, the Soviets sent in, I believe it was 39 people with not having any personal protective equipment, PEE, for radioactivity, and those people perished, but not one person has died directly from the accident. And for more than half a century, we've had small nuclear reactors on submarines and nuclear powered carriers, and there's just no excuse for us to not have those as backup systems, beginning with our military, then for other critical infrastructure around this country. And I'm happy to see and observe that the United States is warming up to it.
Yep.
Europeans are warming up to it, although they panicked. And some of the people, some of the organizations around Spain, I think they eliminated all of their nuclear power plants. And what did we see a few months ago was their
Yeah.
grid was
Down.
hammered and their solar and wind powered generation couldn't even come close to keep up with it.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
even the Europeans are starting to think, maybe we need to have some nuclear reactors. So
Yep.
let's get on the bandwagon there. Let's push them to do more of that. And Glenn suggests I talk more about Naval Postgraduate School. The Center for Homeland Security and Defense that I attended there for the year-long program was phenomenal. We looked, and at that time, that was in 2013, we were looking largely at foreign terrorist organizations. And I tried to push a little bit more on the idea of grid down
Hmm.
prevention, mitigation, hardening. And until the Metcalf incident, very few people wanted to talk about it or even listen to me. But that was just eye-opening for me to discuss with some of the the national top expertise that went through that program. And
Yep.
it wasn't a leadership school, it was a school for people already in leadership positions. And we had people from the Director of National Intelligence's office there. We had top FEMA officials, top DHS officials, CISA officials were there. And then lowly public works directors like myself were brought in for the infrastructure side of it. And uh, that organization and Naval Postgraduate School doesn't get enough recognition for what it does. But
It's an excellent.
there are other organizations and
Yeah.
FEMA. Folks that are listening, go on the FEMA website, get your, I think it's called a SID, student identification number, and they just do a little background check on you, make sure you're not a terrorist or someone, and then you can start taking those classes, and that's what we all need to do. And I
Yep.
think I took over 50 of those classes. There was a large curriculum that I had to take to become a Colorado certified emergency manager. And while I didn't ever serve as an emergency manager in a local government, I was very involved in SEMA, Colorado Emergency Management Association, NEMA, which is National Emergency Management Association, and that's the association of the leadership of all 50 states and our territories working together. There they created what's called EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And what came out of that was a group of states all agreeing to work together and to provide response teams, MSR, mission, um, MRPs, mission specific programs, mission specific teams, everything from the utility organizations being able to send trucks, platoons of trucks to help restore electricity, public works departments sending trucks, dozers, cranes to help in collapses from earthquakes, from tornadoes.
Hmm.
Uh, I was lucky enough when I was the committee chair for the National Emergency Management Technical Committee for the American Public Works Association. I was assigned to that EMAC advisory group, so I got to work with people from every facet of every state who were trying to work together. So we do have some of those backstops in place, and local communities have agreed to work together through uh, agreements. And we as citizens need to ask those hard questions of our local government officials and
Absolutely.
start insisting on more and more and more cooperation. So
I
I've
agree.
rambled on enough, but if you have other questions I can answer, I
I
will try.
absolutely thank you for your expertise and your experience and sharing that with us. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm forever grateful to have you on the podcast. And is there, any? I shared in the chat the link to the EMP Task Force, which is EMP Task Force.us that you serve on. You can go over there to the website, but is there any other information you'd like to share as we close?
Well, there are a lot of organizations. There are movies. Of course, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of so called experts on disaster preparedness. Uh, don't take them all at face value. Do your research. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention an expert we have that's one of our top officials on the EMP task force, the task force on national homeland security is Jonathan Hollerman. He's
Yes.
written several of the best books ever published. When I retired, I had in my mind I was going to write the ultimate book. And then I read Jonathan's first book called Survival Theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, enough said. I don't need to do it. And he's far more qualified. Look up Jonathan Hollerman and his organizations and read his books. And don't get too disappointed because it can be frightening because Jonathan's one of those who doesn't sugarcoat anything either.
Right.
And so there are many, many resources out there. Be a little careful of who you believe. Everybody and their dog has a website talking about what experts they are. And take
Yeah.
those with a grain of salt, but read the books I've mentioned today and do your research and go to bed and sleep
And sleep
well
fine.
at night.
Yeah, and I want to add David Teich movie Grid Down. And we did have Jonathan was actually our first guest on the podcast. So
Yes,
you go back and watch him. We're hoping to have him back on again. But he's a wealth of information and expertise in survival in
right.
difficult situations. So thank you again, Michael. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope to have you back maybe
Well,
next year. And just have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And I know I'm going to go off and try to catch those northern lights to see if I can get some great pictures for those of you out there. We have the pleasure tonight, I believe, might be the last night, but they have dipped so far into the United States that just go find some open sky and look north, and there you go. So, with that, I want to thank everyone. Thank all the grid warriors for joining us today. Please hit the thumbs up, and we will see you next Wednesday. Take care.
all right. Thank you.